Welcome to Rambam. We started a new book, seventh book out of 14. Amazing. Whoa, we are just moving. This is Hilchas Kaloyim. It's the book called Zroyim, which means seeds, literally, which means the things that have to do with the land. Ah, look at that. It used to be part of the land. It got it got beheaded. I don't know if you can replant. We could graft. So we're learning about the laws of Kilayim. Kilayim means mixtures, mixtures of seeds, grafting, and so on, which is a prohibition. You're not allowed to graft. You're not allowed to seed different seeds together. You're allowed to have the benefit of it. So you can eat an nectarine, but you can't plant a peach and a plum seed together. You're not allowed to do that. You can't graft different trees, right, to make them grow as kilaim, as a mixture. I see you're not allowed to do that. The same species, not different species, not of different species. So you're not allowed to do the act, and this is, yeah. But you're allowed to have the benefit of whatever that act is. So, like a nectarine is a mixed species, right? Yeah, plum and peach, right? It's got a peach skin and a plum skin and a peach interior, right? And that's the extent of my my knowledge. Okay, so we're in chapter 3. Halacha 1. There are certain species of plants that will divide into separate forms because of the difference in the place that they grow and the difference in the manner in which the earth is cultivated until they appear into two species. Nevertheless, since they are one species, they are not considered to collide with each other. Because they grow from the same place, but they grow differently. I don't know what that is. Doesn't give an example. Oh, he's going to give an example. And there are species of plants that resemble each other and whose form is close to being the same. Nevertheless, because they are two species, it's forbidden to grow them together. So they look the same, but they're not the same. So let's give it. What's implied? What's the example? Lettuce with wavy lettuce, endives and wild endives, leek with wild leek, coriander and mountain coriander, mustard and Egyptian mustard, Egyptian squash and squash of ashes are not considered as colliding with each other. So that's okay, those combinations, right? Why? Because they came from the same place, but they somehow, look different, but they are the same, right? Similarly, wheat and undomesticated wheat, barley and oats, rye and spelt, beans and white peas, babicus, I don't know what that is, and lugum and osea. Oh, okay, white beans and azuki beans, zucchini and cucumbers, cabbage and cauliflowers, beets and sorrel are not kilayim with each other, right? They're not. Kilay means mixed species, right? Mixture. It's not called a mixture, therefore it is permitted. But radishes and Israeli radishes, mustard and bitter cabbage. I don't know how mustard and bitter cabbage come together exactly. Seem compete very different. We'll see in halacha 6, okay? Greek squash and Egyptian squash, or squash of ashes, although they resemble each other, they are kilayim with each other. So they look the same, but they're not the same. Because they don't grow together, I guess. They don't come from the same patch, so to speak. Okay? We're getting an education over here. Right? Back to farming. Similarly, with regard to trees, so that was vegetation, now trees. There are species which resemble each other with regard to their leaves and their fruit. Oh, what's this? What kind of tree is this?
Palm.
This is palm? No,
No.
not palm tree. No, palm branches you would have. No. Unless this is like, Montreal palm. Right. All right, so they're species which resemble each other with regard to leaves and their fruit. But since they're separate species, they are kilaim. What is implied? Apples and crab apples, peaches and almonds. How do peaches and almonds resemble each other? Prunes and jujube. I thought jujube was like, candy. I guess Arabian jujube isn't. Although they resemble each other, they are kilaim with each other, but apricots and white plums and squints and lavalley are not kilaim with each other. Similarly, there are other plants and trees which our sages did not classify as kilaim, although they are inherently two different species. So inherently they're two different species, so they should be kilaim. They should be called, right, a mixture, but they're not. Why? Because the leaves of one resembles the leaves of the other, or the fruit of one resembles the fruit of the other very closely to the extent that they appear as different shades of the same species. Rationale is with regard to kilaim, we follow the appearance alone. What? Well, we just said. So, according to this understanding, it is our perception which determines whether one is mixing species or not. Their biological nature is a secondary factor. That's a secondary factor. In other words, they resemble, but they're really completely different. But that the resemblance is more important than the fact that they are completely different,
Determined by our perception.
Yeah. But one second, we just said though.
There's a secondary factor.
Mm-hmm.
Perception.
So here they are species which resemble each other, number 4, with regard to leaves and their fruit, but they're still separate species. But here they resemble. Here it's also because here they resemble so closely that they look like just different shades of the same species, even though they're separate species. That's the difference. It's a much more closer resemblance. Okay, so what's implied by this? Turnips and radishes are not kilaim with each other because their fruits are similar. I guess, yeah, different shades. Right, the difference in principle of Rambam and considers these fruits as kilaim. Well, disagreement over here, by the way. Turnips and Israeli radishes are not kilaim with each other because their leaves resemble each other. But radishes and Israeli radishes are kilaim, even though their fruits resemble each other and their leaves resemble each other because the taste of the fruits are drastically different from each other. Aha. So now we brought in a third element, right? Not just the leaves are the same and the fruit is the same, but if the taste is radically different, then they're not, right? This sounds like quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is, light. Is it a ray or is it a fragmented is it particles, right? It's based on observation, not, right? Interesting idea. How we experience it is what it is. Okay, number 7. How much is it necessary to separate between the two species of plants so that they should not consider as kilaim when planting them in the same field? So now you want to plant in the same field. How much have to be separated? So that two species should look distinct from each other, however they appear as if they are sewn together. This is forbidden. So they shouldn't appear like they're sewn together, and others are intermingled. You gotta have separate. They have to be separated. There are many different measures given with regard to the distance between to make them distinction, to make this distinction. Everything depends on the size in the field that is being sown and the proliferation of leaves and plants have, and to the extent to which the branches spread out. So it depends, right? How big the leaves are, how big the branches, and so on. We'll even see the roots. So what is implied? If a person has sown a species of grain in his field, and he sought to sow another species of grain in another field at its side, he must make a separation of the size of an area which one can sow a quarter of a kav between the two. This is approximately 10 and 1/5 cubits by 10 and 1/5 cubits. So cubit, this is a cubit, is an amma, right? An arm's length is a cubit, right? Not Cupid. It's not an angel over here, Cupid, right? This is a cubit. Yeah, we're good. Okay, Cupid. Yeah, this applies whether the space left empty ceases in the midst of the field or continues alongside the entire side. If there's less than this space between them, sowing these crops are forbidden. But he's not liable for lashes unless there are 6 handbreadths or less close to each other. Yes. It's a serious, yeah. It's a prohibition. Any prohibition in the Torah that you transgress intentionally, not unintentionally, right? You get lashes for it unless you could fix it, right? But here you put it together. Although it's interesting, you could fix it because you could uproot it. You could take it away. But yeah. But I guess maybe that's not so simple. To understand that. But no 9?
Point of view.
Oh yeah. All right. So this is the hand breadth. So minimal, you need 6 hand breadths. If it's less than 6 hand breadths, then you would get lashes if you did it willfully to plant if you sowed grain and next to it you sowed some other species, right? So if it was less than that 6, right, 5, so it was like that size between them, you would get lashes if you did it intentionally. The ideal is that it should be 10 handbreadths and a fifth. Not exactly 1 second. Probably. Okay. Number 10. If the field was sown with vegetables and he desired to sow another species of vegetables, even squash, which squash leaves spread very far in another field at its side, he must make a separation of a square 6 handbreadths by 6 handbreadths. So 6 by 6, right? 6 by 6, need to make a separation, right? Between the squash and some other thing. Between the two, whether the space left empty ceases or in the midst of the field or continues alongside the entire side. If there's less in this space between them, sowing these crops are forbidden, but it's not liable for lashes unless it's within a handbreadth of each other. So if you did less than this is a handbreadth, right? You did less than a handbreadth, then you would get liable for lashes because now we're not talking about grain. We're talking about vegetables, right? I think grain maybe because it's more rooted. The roots are bigger or stronger and they're larger and it's larger, grows higher, taller, right?
The leaves grow wider, but
Yeah, but grain, we said you need more space. So we're trying to understand why would you need more space by grain?
maybe they're more susceptible to be grafted. Fruit and vegetables.
Number 11. I hear, I don't know. If there was second. If there's a grain sown in one of two fields and vegetables and squash sown on the other, one must make a separate size of the area in which one can sow a quarter of a kav between the two. Since the grain is involved, we rule more. So with grain, it's more stringent. So now we have grain on one side, vegetables on the other. So you need a greater separation. Okay. When does the need to make the distinction of the size mentioned above apply between two fields? If, however, he sowed vegetables in his field and he desired to sow a row of another species or vegetables at their side, if he wants to sow this row in the middle of the field, he must leave such a trench on either side. Okay. It is sufficient for him to leave a trench 6 handbreadths long with the width of the same as its depth between the row and the field. For the separation of the sizes is sufficient to set the row apart. So, okay. If it's 2 fields, so that's what we spoke about. Here he doesn't define what a field is.
Anyways, footnotes is something. 600.
Yeah, I know. I'm saying, but he doesn't here. Elsewhere he does, right? Of 33,750 square cubits. Okay. So now you're talking about doing it in the same field. So in the same field, you want to put vegetables next to grain. So then you need to leave a trench of 6 cubits long. And the width and the depth are the same, which is it has to be deep, a trench hand breadth, wide a hand breadth, long at least 6. But I'm not clear what do you mean? Why isn't it long along the whole way to separate it? Not really clear on
6 is fine.
anyway. Okay. When a field is sown with grain and a person desires to sow a row of vegetables, even squash whose leaves are long and become tangled in its midst. So now you have a field, but in the field you want to make, like, you have grain here, you have grain here. You want to make in the middle somewhere some squash. So you must leave a distance of 6 handbreadths between them. 6 between. Doesn't sound like you need a ditch. If the leaves of squash become extended and enter into the portion where the grain was sown and became entangled with them, he should uproot enough of the grain in front of the squash so that the leaves will not become tangled. So you can cut off the extensions of the squash plant, right? So you could do that, but he says it's going to grow back. So therefore, the Rambam's giving just better advice is to make, bring the grain further back. Yeah. Needless to say, if he sowed one row of one species and another row of another species, it's sufficient that there'd be a trench between them, as will be explained. Okay. Whew. Not easy to be a Jewish farmer.
Or a Jewish consumer.
No, because it's not a problem in the consumption. As I mentioned, you can eat the nectarine. You can't. Now, today they make nectarine from the nectarine seed, but originally it was from a mixed species, right? I don't think they make mixed species now of nectarine. I think, has its own seed. All right.
Don't worry.
Yeah, I have a nectarine downstairs. How do you like that? I brought nectarine today. Nothing is coincidental. You know that. Okay. If he made an appropriate separation between the two species, but one of the species became draped upon the other one, whether the grain became draped over the grain, another grain, or the vegetable upon an other vegetable, a vegetable upon grain, or grain upon the vegetable, everything is permitted, for they made a separation of the appropriate measure. So, right, it's appropriate because you made the appropriate separation. There is one exception, Greek squash, because it becomes extended very far. Therefore, if it becomes draped over other species, one should uproot the species in front of it, as explained in the previous halacha. Okay. Otherwise, if you did it right, even though it becomes draped over, right? Because remember, what did we say? It was interesting that perception of it is what is the most important rather than the biological fact, right? So here, the fact that it's draped over, so it looks as if it's mixed species. But since you did it correctly, in the end, it's okay. If between two species there were any of the following: a cistern, a plowed field left fallow, a stone fence, a path, a wooden fence with a 10 handbreadth high, right? It's like, almost 40 inches, a trench that is 10 handbreadths deep or 4 handbreadths wide, a tree whose branches hang to the earth, or a rock that is 10 handbreadths high and 4 handbreadths wide. It is permissible to place the one species on one side of the divider and the other species on the other side of the divider. So that's considered a divider, right? It's a natural divider or something that you built. So those are considered appropriate. Since one of the above separating between them, they appear distinct from each other. That's the important point, right? Number 16, when is it necessary for there to be such a separation or divider? When one is sowing the two species in his own field, right? It's in your own field. That's when you have to make all these separations. However, if one person sowed wheat in his field and his colleague is permitted to sow barley in the bordering field, as implied by the verse, do not sow mixed field in your field. Prohibitions in your field. That's what Torah says. Prohibition applies only sowing mixed species in one's own field. Torah does not say mixed species that shall not be sown on the earth. Doesn't say that. So if neighbors are next to each other, we don't have to worry. Moreover, even if one planted barley in one's own field next to the wheat and extended the barley until it is adjacent to the field of the colleague, which was planted with barley, it is permitted. Rationale is the barley in one's own field appears to be the end of his colleague's field. I didn't get that. You got that? I didn't get that.
It's also perception.
Yeah, it's also perception, but so 1 second.
It was from the neighbor's field to your field.
Yeah, but it's barley, so it's a problem. No, okay, there's not a division. No, because it doesn't matter because it's it's neighboring, right? To someone else's field. To that we eat and extended the barley until it was adjacent to the field of his colleague, which was planted with barley. Okay, I'm not clear on that one. 17. If his field was planted with wheat, and his colleague's field adjoining was planted with wheat, which of course no problem. He's permitted to sow one row of flax at the side of his wheat adjoining the colleague's field. Rationale is that the observer knows that it is not the common practice to sow only one row of flax, and this person is merely testing his field to see if it is fit to plant flax or not. Thus, he is sowing the seed with the intent of destroying it. Therefore, it is forbidden to sow other species between these two fields that are planted with one species until he makes a distinction between them two species within his own property. So flax is unique because he's only testing the field with one row because one doesn't plant flax, only one row. Don't ask me why. Do you know why?
You're gonna be happy with the brand, right?
Huh?
That you're gonna enjoy 18.
Despite the fact that okay, so being that it's not a permanent thing, he's going to uproot it. So you could do it, and anybody who sees it knows it's only testing the field to see if, I guess, flax doesn't grow everywhere so easily. So he's just testing, right? Okay, yes, we got picture. Okay, when a person's field and its calling's field were sown, and the two different types of grain, he should not sow even one row of mustard seed or safflower seed, because it is customary to sow one row of these, because that is customary with doing one row. If, however, there were two fields planted with different species of vegetables, it is permitted to sow mustard seed or safflower between them, for it is permitted to bring any species close to the mustard seed or safflower within the exception of grain. There is a distinction in the latter instance because the mustard seed and safflower seed do not have an effect on grain. There is a distinction in the other end. Why? Because the mustard seed and safflower do not have harmful effect on grain. They don't have harmful effects, so therefore people are going to do it, and therefore you shouldn't. Similarly, if the corner of a portion of one field sown with one species touches a block of the field sown with another species, it is permitted because they appear separate from each other. Needless to say, if the corner of the portion of one field sown with other species touches the corner of the field sown with the other species, it is permitted without setting them apart or making distinctions, we explain, because it appears that it is the end of one field and touch the end of another field. So here, the white, a corner of the field sown with one type of produce. Black is a block of a different field sown with another type of produce. The diagram is adapted. Okay. So that would be permitted. Wow. I'm going to do one halacha in chapter 4. It is permitted to sow 2 rows of zucchini next to each other. Next to them, 2 rows of squash. Next to them, 2 rows of Egyptian beans, provided there is a trench between each species. Yeah, you need the trench. One should not, however, sow 1 row of zucchini, 1 row of squash, 1 row of Egyptian beans, even though there is a trench separating between them, because the leaves of these species grow long and become extended and tangled. If they are sown 1 row next to each other, everything will become intermingled and it will appear as they were sowed crops as mixtures. I don't get it. What's the difference? If you have 2 rows and you have a trench,
But the trench doesn't separate one.
but if you have 1 row, you have a trench there also, it says. I guess because leaves will grow like this, so they'll grow partially into the other leaves, right? And partially here. So therefore it's only partially onto the other. So the trench is separating. But if you have the trench, it's going to, and on 1 row, so it's only growing onto 2 places, maybe. That's the only thing I can understand. But what do I know? Definitely not a Jewish farmer. Yeah. All right. Here comes my nectarine.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
folks. Bye,
Have a great
Gizun.
day.
Good day.
Yeah,
Bye.